You're listening to Packers Talk Network.
Do you want to experience the thrill of a Packers game at Lambeau Field? If so, be sure to get your guaranteed authentic tickets from theticketking.com, a longtime trusted source and local Green Bay business. Just go to packerstalk.com/tickets for more information and ticket links. That's packerstalk.com/tickets.
Welcome to the Packers Weekly Podcast, part of the PackersTalk.com network. I'm your host, Miles Teddick, joined by your co-host, Tim Hamilton. We are diehard Packers fans. We love talking about the Pack. We are not getting into national sports media headlines and all the nonsense that they like to talk about. We're sticking with real football, and we're diving into the top topics around the Pack every week, breaking down games during the season and sorting through all the drama and the rumors of the offseason. If y'all want to support the podcast, please spike that like button for us. Give us a follow on all the socials and subscribe to the Packers Talk YouTube channel. Those things take seconds, make a huge difference for us, and we thank you kindly. Tim, good evening, sir. How you doing?
Good evening, Miles. I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing pretty good, man. That was an entertaining combine we got there.
Yeah, it was impressive. There's a lot of great athletes, and from a Packers perspective, it's now pretty cool that we have the RAS scores, which I know it's kind of crazy to talk about that if you're not deep in the woods with drafts. Yeah, with draft happenings, it's something that is very important in identifying guys who the Packers will or won't draft in most cases. So now we got some of those numbers, and we can really zero in and focus in on the pool of players who they'll probably be picking from in April.
Absolutely, man. There's definitely a little bit of a skimming down that happens here, I think, at the Combine. You get some official measurements in and certain things, and you get some of those meetings in. You learn a little bit more about guys' character. So I think that it was pretty interesting. There's certainly some things worth talking about. Obviously, the record-breaking 40 with Worthy. But there's, like you said it when we were talking about it before, man, there's some athletes. Like this.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible.
One thing that stood out to me, and I think got overshadowed by Worthy's record-breaking performance, and rightfully so, there's a lot of fast DBs. Like, if you're not running a 4.4, you're at the bottom, man. Like, the top half, they're running 4.3s. Like, there is speed in the cornerback department.
Yeah, there is. And to me, that's a position of need for the Packers. And I think there's speed. There's some really good athletes there. And it's going to, there's going to probably be a run on corners in the first round, but then there's some depth there too into the second day and early third day with some guys, especially some of, potential third day guys that made a jump because they tested so well at the Combine that you kind of got to go back and look at and be like, okay, maybe these are Packer people. Maybe these are people that are going to be looking at and possibly drafting that we didn't know about before, but now that we have actual measurements and testing numbers on them, they're a potential fit. So yeah, that I was incredibly impressed by the cornerback class. Like you said, overall, I thought they were impressive. And I also thought the offensive line was really good. I think we knew going in, offensive line was deep.
Absolutely.
But now to see how some of these guys move for being 300+ pound guys, it's just incredible to see that.
It really is.
There's a lot of like first round offensive linemen who there's still kind of a question about. Is some teams are going to view him as a tackle, some are going to view him as a guard, but I think we're starting to kind of see some of these guys that maybe we thought were going to have to start as guards that probably can start at tackle. And it's one of those things like let them play tackle where they played in college, and if they show they can't play, then you kick them inside. But I think there's some guys that showed up at the Combine that, let them play tackle, let them play where they're comfortable. They're not automatically that transition to guard. So those two positions, cornerback and offensive line, I was really impressed by. What about you? Any positions or any players that really stood out for you right off the top?
Man, I got to say the running backs. The running back group is talented. And my tweet about this was I think the devaluation of the position in the NFL has affected kind of the perception of value on the position and the talent that's in this draft. There's some serious talent here, and there's certainly some speed. Isaac Guerrero comes to mind with his freak score. Talk about RAS scores. He had was it the second best?
Yeah, I think it was like the second best all time.
Ever? Yeah.
Yeah.
Holy crap, man.
Incredible.
So for those who aren't familiar with the RAS scores, it's basically a combination of all the metrics: height, weight, speed, strength, all the measurables that they typically get at the combine or the pro days. You could put those together. Isn't there a little tool online that you can kind of build it yourself, essentially?
Yeah, you can actually go to their site, which is RAS Football.
There you
and go. RAS Football. So you can build it yourself, where they post them. It's literally, I think it's one person that basically runs the site, and his name's, I want to give him a shout out because we're going to reference him tonight. We're going to reference him,
yeah, there'll be a lot. Yeah.
Process. It's Kent Lee Platt. And his Twitter handle is @MathBomb. So you can follow him there. It's great. You can go to, he's got the site. Not everybody's up yet on the site, but most of the players throughout the combine testing, you can go to the timeline on Twitter or X and see their RAS scores there. And then eventually they get built into the site too. I guess they're working on that, and that's, more to come on that. But yeah, you can go to the site and actually build it out yourself, or it's already built in for you for most of these guys. And I guess some of it will be, I'm not sure exactly how they do it once we have pro days, if they just fill in the blanks for guys who didn't do complete testing at the combine, or if they change anything from what they were at combine. I feel like maybe they take an average of what combine and pro days are. It could be that too. I can't remember specifically, how they do it once there's pro day testing that comes into, but some of that too isn't official. It's more so official at the combine. So I think that's the greater emphasis. But yeah, like you said, it's a combination of all this athletic testing. It takes in the basics like height and weight, arm length is in there, but then it's going to look at their 40-yard dash. And within the 40, it looks at their 10-yard split, the 20-yard split. And then it looks at, different drills that they do, the agility drills, 3-cone, short shuttle, things like that. They're grading their explosion on the vertical and broad jumps. So it takes in like a full scope of how these guys test as athletes and kind of give you a clearer picture of what they are as an athlete, not necessarily what they are on the field as a football player, but it gives you that athletic, background or athletic information on these guys.
Yeah, and height and weight very much factors into that too. So that's yes. I think even hand size at some positions comes into play. So it's a pretty neat little all around metric. It's certainly not the end all be all of anything, but Packers Twitter has been very very good at pointing out that there is certainly a pattern that Goot follows more often than not. That as it aligns with these scores, but. So they're very interesting to look at for sure.
Yeah, I don't think, maybe the Packers are aware of the RAS score, but I think they have some kind of internal system and internal
That's what I would
thresholds that hit. But how it works itself out is very close to what the RAS scores are, and we're going to see this throughout the draft process where you can whittle it down the list as far as who they're probably looking at, and they're going to be picking from that list. And as an example, last year they picked most of their draft was from that shortened list of, guys that were above 8 when their final RAS scores. Yeah. That's what they're picking from. So you can really identify that small group of players who will probably, from that small group of players, there's going to be several of them that end up being Packers on draft weekend.
Yeah. And we're going to, as we go through our prospect, preview, whatever we want to call it, we don't have any kind of clever names for it at this point, but as we go through the draft prospects over the next few weeks, that's one of the reasons that we were sort of waiting on the combine is there will be some whittling down, as you said, of those lists. So we can drill into who those are. And then another thing that's going to go on top of that is the Packers, they draft from the guys that they call in to Green Bay for pre-draft meetings. There's I think it's acmepackingcompany.com. Shout out to these folks for some good information. They pointed out in one of their articles the list of guys that they brought in, and you look at it from last year, it's like Carl Brooks, Dontavian Wicks, Lou Nichols, Sean Clifford, and it's not everybody. But then the year before that, it's Devontae Wyatt, Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs, Tariq Carpenter, Rasheed Walker, Samari Toure. That's their draft class. You know what I mean? So there are ways of whittling this list down and not getting too distracted by some of these other players that sure are fun to imagine as Green Bay Packers, but it just gets to a certain point where it's like, that's probably not realistic. So we're not going to waste a lot of time on that.
Yeah. And as far as the visits go, like you're right. Like who they're bringing in, they're not going to obviously take them all they can because there's 30 guys that come in, but there's going to definitely be guys that they bring in for visits who they are drafting. And the difference with Goody and compared to Ted Thompson, Goody will bring in guys that he's going to draft, that he wants to draft. And then there's going to be some that he's targeting as potential free agents after the draft, guys that don't get targeted, who they want to build that relationship with. Whereas
Absolutely.
Ted Thompson, most of the time, the guys he brought in were guys who were not going to be drafted, or at least probably weren't on the Packers board, who he was really targeting to set up those relationships, who he could sign after the draft. Because Ted kept it everything was covered up. He didn't want anything getting out, like, hey, they're meeting with player X, so the Packers must be interested in him. He didn't want that getting out. Like, he wanted to keep the guys he kind of does it both ways, whereas Ted was mostly like, he was just bringing guys in who wanted to sign as a free agent. So yeah, definitely follow those. Not so much who they met with at the combine or who they met at the Senior Bowl, because they're going to meet with everybody. They bring it into Green Bay to meet with.
Yeah, and that's one of the thoughts that I had is, there's a little bit of a direction there, right? Oh, they met with these guys at the combine. There's something there, right? But at the same time, it's not as indicative as the Green Bay visits. Those visits typically point to, at least for the last couple of years, guys that have a very strong chance of being drafted by the Packers. So that's not to say a lack of a visit, it indicates they won't draft them. But again, we're going to try to get closer to the prospects that we think the Packers are likely to draft or go after, and not waste too much time with who we have mock drafted a million times or who we wish would be drafted. I was laughing at this video was going around Twitter earlier of the Bills fans, these guys doing a video reaction of when Josh Allen was drafted, right? And they're all there, and one guy shouts out, "Rosen!" And then they announce Josh Allen, and they're all just devastated. They're just devastated. Oh, man. They just knew that the rest of the franchise was destroyed. They just knew, right? And I just love that the one guy shouts out Rosen as a nice little cherry on top. Point being, let's trust the GMs here, especially ours right now. He's done really well the last few years and not so bad before that, at least in certain moments. So trust the GM, but what we want to do is try to figure out what the GM's going to do, right? We're not necessarily rooting for our favorites or anything here. We're just trying to help you guys figure out what we think they'll do. So that's where we're at here. There's only a little bit that can be learned from the combine as far as those meetings go. What I would point out is they did meet with Xavier Worthy and they did meet with A.D. Mitchell. Between the two, and this is where the RAS scores start coming in, I think A.D. Mitchell is far more likely to end up a Packer than Xavier Worthy, simply because, and I think this league has proved this over and over again, Xavier Worthy will probably get overdrafted now. And that's not to say that he won't be a good NFL player. He very well could be. He's played very well at UT for the last 3 seasons now. A lot of people have pointed out that John Ross is kind of a comparison. He had one good season at Washington before he did that, so he was a little bit, less sure or less of a certain thing. Mm-hmm. Whereas Xavier Worthy, he could be a very good NFL player, but you're gonna have to overpay for him at this point because of that 40 time. That's what these guys do. So I don't think that the Packers will be the team that does that. But A.D. Mitchell seems like a guy that not only is a Packers kind of guy as far as the way he plays, he looks, he's got the build, 6'1", 200, very sharp route runner, fast, strong, he looks like a very good all-around receiver. And And the way that this draft is shaping up, I think that he very well could be available to them when they're drafting, whether that's 25, but just sort of in that range because they have some maneuverability there. So, yeah, that's the one that I would maybe pay attention to, see who goes and gets that Green Bay visit because that might also tip you off. But, yeah, so what about for you? Any concerns that came out of this thing?
I wouldn't say it was a major concern. It was kind of almost verifying what we kind of knew going in, but that's the safety class isn't very strong. And obviously the Packers have a huge need at safety right now, and they don't really have a starting safety on the roster. So it's something they're going to have to address, whether, in the draft and free agency. But there was really no one at the combine who kind of pulled away and made themselves like top of that class. Like I like Tyler Nubin from Minnesota. There's a couple other guys I like as well, but none of those guys I would feel at this point comfortable taking 25th. I think they're more second round guys. And it's just kind of a hit or miss class, I think, at safety. I don't think it's very deep. And, one of the concerning players in the combine, or concerning results from the combine, was going into it, we thought the kid Kitchens from Miami, who looked pretty good at times, especially in 2022, not so much in 2023, but we thought he was probably going to be at the top or near the top of the safety class. And he tested very poorly. I think his RAS scores under 3. He ran like a 4.6, probably off the board for the Packers at this point, or definitely off the board in the first couple of days. I mean, maybe if he falls to the, later on in the third day, they could take him, but so that's concerning. And I don't think it's a great overall class to begin with. There were some guys that tested very well. Cole Bishop from Utah. I want to go back and take a look at him and find out a little more. He did great. Like I said, I like Nubin. There's a couple other guys, the kid from Texas Tech. But
tested really well. Yeah.
Yeah, he did too. So, I mean, there's some guys to dive into a little more. I just don't think it's a real strong or real deep class. I think they're going to, I think it's going to be a position they have to address early, unless they go out in free agency and sign 2 starters, which maybe we'll talk about later. I think it's more of a possibility now than
we'll get to that one. I think there's
weeks ago.
Definitely a headline there.
Yeah. I think they're going to get at least 1 starter in free agency. So I'll just say that much. But I think they probably have to address safety regardless of what they do in free agency. I think they have to address it at some point. And it might have to be early. And for me, I was thinking second round. I'm still in that mode of thinking that they need to go second round with it. But my concern is you better get them in the second round, because after that, I think it really falls off. And you're looking at developmental guys who are kind of along the lines of Anthony Johnson Jr. going into a second year, who you're hoping develop, and maybe you hit a home run on it. But if you're taking somebody in the 4th round, I think first year you're thinking he's a special teams guy, and you're looking at it long range, long term, hoping you can develop them, which all these guys are looking at long term, hoping you can develop them. But I don't think you can expect immediate impact from a safety, after the second day of this draft. I think the talent falls off right there. So to me, the safety class is a concern, just because of the overall lack of depth, and that it's such a huge position of need for them. But beyond that, was there anything that stood out to you? Any players, any positions where you're like maybe a little disappointed in, didn't see what you were hoping to see?
I'm a little, not specifically with this group, but I'm a little disappointed in just kind of what the combine has turned into for quarterbacks. I'm not trying to be a, old fuddy-duddy over here or whatever. I'm like, I get it. I think we talked about it last week. It just, they don't have anything to gain in some cases. Yeah. But I would love to see that be a little bit more of a competitive tradition. Like, hey man, I'm here to sling it. I'm here to maybe win a few draft spots, and or if you're the top dog, like show up and be the top dog. But again, I get it. There's business decisions being made. That's probably the biggest disappointment for me. Quick shout out to our guy Rev Trev there in Goot We Trust. I think that is the way, brother. And he had another comment that Josh Allen video was really funny. I got a kick out of it. That was a lot of fun. But I will say, just in commenting on this safety class, it doesn't look deep, but I think that there are a number of options here that the Packers could go with. And we were just talking about meetings. We can't really draw too much from the combine meetings, but they met with 4 different safeties at the combine. They didn't meet with a single linebacker from what I saw. They met with 2 receivers, as we mentioned. They met with 1 D lineman. And again, this is not set in stone. I'm happy to be corrected, but I tried to look around pretty hard to figure out who they met with. And outside of safety, running back was the next biggest group that they met with. So it's like I think they know where their holes are.
Yeah.
And I think they know where they're going to be trying to dig deep. These are positions where I think you're looking at them taking 2 to 3 swings at the position. Like kind of like last year with tight end. They were aware of what the position was at tight end going into the draft, and they took a couple swings at it. Nailed it, by the way.
Absolutely.
So I think that's what that would indicate, is that those are the positions that they're going to probably look to take more than one guy. And that is where you want to know about guys for your day 3 picks, right? So, yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting how they approach the draft, but I would imagine that they get a couple of swings at safety pretty early.
Yeah, and that's interesting you bring up tight end because going into last year draft time, they didn't have a tight end really, at least.
I mean, it is what the safety room is right now.
Yeah.
There's one.
And it was DeGuara, who's not really a pure tight end, and he's a bottom of the roster guy. But yeah, that's a really good comparison. Is like they didn't have a tight end last year. They went in and they took 2 second and third round guys. This year they don't really have a safety. I think the one difference to me though is last year that tight end class, like going in, it was deep, and there were a lot of tight ends where you're like, man, this is a loaded class, and it really was, and it proved that in the first year. I mean, we saw 2 Packers tight ends, we saw Laporta, we saw Kincaid, like it was deep. This year it's kind of like they need a safety. I don't know, and I'm not saying that they can't find one. I think second round is the spot. They could definitely find a safety or 2 in this draft. You can always do that. It's just, to me, it's more of a concern because they're just. It's not deep. It's not deep. Yeah, it's not a really good safety class. It's lacking for the most part. But who knows? In Goot, we trust. I trust them to find those guys. I just think I think the comparison's really good to tight end. It's just the difference is tight end was really deep last year. Safety this year just is not.
Well, and that's where I would also look for them to they may have a more creative view of this board than we do. What I mean by that is there might be a blend of cornerbacks that they view as potential nickel safety type guys. There's certainly plenty of depth at that position, and there's some big, fast guys. So, there might be some guys that have historically been cornerbacks, but they're sitting there looking at him going, this guy's got the tools that we need out of a nickelback that can also play safety, and we'll let him win whatever job that's going to be. Best player available, take the athlete, find out what he can do. But yeah, it does. I think that there's a couple ways of looking at it, and we're going to get into that in a couple of weeks, I think, is when we go into DBs. But we're going to go through it, and we're going to try to narrow in on a few guys that we think that the Packers may also be narrow. Am I good here? Did I cut out?
You did for a second. I got you.
I'm back. I will say one thing that I was not let down by is Wilson, the linebacker out of North Carolina or NC State. Excuse me. Dude is an athlete. That guy's a beast. And he's one of those that I don't, there's projections all over the board. I'm not going to pretend that I can know how the board's going to fall, but that's one of those guys that I will say I'm rooting for Goot to go after. Wherever it may be, or second, third, fourth, whatever the round is that you've got him valued at, I hope that he ends up a Packer because he could be a lot of fun to watch on the defense.
Yeah, I mean, he tested through the roof, which I think going in, at least everything I had read about him was he was a great athlete and had really good size. So, but he tested like a freak. Yeah. The concern with him though is he's got a long injury history, so it's going to be how he checks out. Yeah, I've read he's had multiple surgeries. I actually saw somewhere he might have double-digit surgeries, which I don't know if that's accurate or not. But he's had multiple injuries and a pretty extensive list of of injuries that have kept them out for games. So that's usually not what they like, and rightfully so. But again, it does. You got to do more research, like what type of injuries are they, or something that could impact them long term, or is just like a broken hand. That's not something that should be recurring. But just that injury history with him. Other than that, I'm with you. Like, he's got the size, he's got phenomenal athletic ability. Yeah, he was impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, very impressive. So if there is somebody that, we're just kind of fanning for, I'd say that's one for me. There's a list of receivers we could go through, but that would take the whole episode. We don't need to do that. But yeah, I mean, any other final takeaways on the combine there before we put it behind us?
Yeah, so I mean, just to go back to our discussion about the safeties, like, even though it's not a deep group, I'm all for just starting over at safety with the Packers. Like,
I mean, they basically have.
They have. I don't want to see Savage back. I'm fine with
I think that has passed.
I think that ship has sailed. And I know we had talked about it in the past, and I could have seen a way to bring him back, and I guess I still could if they feel like the new defense can benefit him and they can make the most of his ability. But I just think you look at it kind of like they did last year with tight end. Like, let's just start over. Like, we don't have enough production there. We're not good enough. Like, why bring back players who just underachieved and aren't good enough? Like, we know they're not good enough. We're just hoping maybe a new defense can bring something out of them. So move on, start over. If it's going to be young guys from the draft, that's fine. Like, let's just live with it. We have a new coaching staff, and a lot of these guys on the new coaching staff have defensive back coaching backgrounds. So coach them up, figure it out, and let's start over at the safety position, regardless of how deep or how not deep it is in the draft.
Well, and that could be a sneaky benefit here too. You don't have any kind of legacy personalities or issues you have to combat with, as a new coach. They all have blank canvases to work with, so that could be nice for them to work with. Could be a benefit. But I agree, and I think that's essentially what they've done. I think if they were going to bring Savage back at this point, they would have already done that. Hafley's here, his guys are here. They've had time to have those conversations and to do that and make that happen, and it just hasn't happened. I guess there's a chance they want to see what happens in the draft and then, make a decision from there. But that's where I would turn our attention to probably even the next part of the conversation. But free agency, and maybe not even free agency, depending on how things unfold, but making a trade, which Good has now talked about multiple times, making trades for a veteran. And if I had to, guess at what position you're going to make a trade for a veteran for, it's going to be the safety position. That's your most empty position right now. You've got one guy there, going into his second year, shows some promise. We don't know, nobody knows what Anthony Johnson Jr. is. We think he might be good, shows some flashes of good, probably needs some veteran leadership either way. And the other thing is, and we've called this out before, is Goot does not invest high draft capital into a position that doesn't also have veteran leadership built into it. So we've gone through some of those examples in the past, and you guys can go look at that. But so anytime he's used a high pick, maybe it's a first round or early second round, he's made sure that there is a veteran at that position to guide the player. There hasn't been any kind of, I guess last year with the tight ends would be the main exception to that.
Yeah.
You could say DeGuara, but we just covered that.
Yeah.
But at that point, I would even argue it went well. So, maybe they won't do that. But historically, for the most part, that's what he's done. He's made sure that there's a veteran built in there at that position. So I would look for both moves, right? So taking a couple swings at safety early in the draft, maybe in the second and third round, and then also making a trade or a move for a veteran guy that can step in and be kind of, the captain and quarterback of your defense to the extent that he needs to be, right? I don't know how much Quay Walker remains kind of a captain position, but you're going to need that guy in the backfield anyway. So who that will be, I think is probably the tougher conversation.
Yeah. And I think your point's great, is that Goody has shown he'll double dip at positions. Like, he'll add a veteran and then he'll go and draft at that position too. So I think safety is the position that they're going to target in free agency, and I expect at least one starter in free agency, or I guess a trade, but at least one veteran to come out of the free agent period starting next week. I mean, we're basically in free agency. The agents and the teams are already negotiating. That started at the combine.
Right.
Monday, the 11th, is when they start the legal tampering period, which, I mean, they're already tampering. And then they can't sign a contract until next Wednesday. So by the time you and I talk again next Monday, they may already have signed some free agents. Who knows? Definitely around the league, we're going to see those moves made, whether it's the Packers or not. But yeah, I think they're going to target safeties. There's a pretty good crop right now of free agent safeties. Some of these guys could, be re-signed by their own teams and never make it to the open market within the next week here. But I think it's deep enough where there's a lot of targets for them at safety. I think, we've talked about Antoine Winfield, and we both kind of agree, like, he would be our dream free agent.
Absolutely.
I don't think he's going to make it, whether he gets the franchise tag or re-signs. And I also don't see them paying like $15 million a year for a safety, but I think there's a way that they can maybe pay $8 to $10 million for one, and then you find a guy that's maybe $2 or $3 million, maybe on like a 1-year deal, a veteran who's kind of getting towards the end of the line, but they may feel like could fit in to Sean Gibson, who played for Halfley in Cleveland, coming off, playing for the 49ers. He's raved about Halfley. Maybe he comes in for a year. Maybe a guy that they're trying to resurrect his career, a reclamation project like Jeremy Chin from the Panthers could come in, and if they find a role for him within this defense. So I think there's a way they could actually fit two guys, because they've come up with some extra cap space. One, because the salary cap bumped up more than what was expected. And then they had that weird kind of thing that came out last week from Ken Ingalls, where they had like an additional $5.5 million that was supposed to go to players, but they didn't reach per game roster bonuses, or it was this whole it's basically money that was already accounted for that then ended up didn't go to the players because they didn't meet their per game roster bonuses. Like Bakhtiari had that built in, Aaron Jones had that built in, but because they were injured, those bonuses didn't kick in. Also stuff like off-season workouts, like Jair skipped off-season workouts, so he missed $700,000. So now that comes back to the Packers. So basically they have an extra $5.5 million more, which is cool. They haven't done any major restructurings. They've done a couple, but nothing that's significant. So they have some extra cap space to play with. Goody's kind of, not come out and said it, but I think if you read into some of the things he said, he feels pretty comfortable that they have the room to go out and do what they need to do in free agency or trades. And he's, like you said, he's mentioned that twice, trading draft picks for veterans. And that kind of stood out because it's not something he's ever said before. And now he said it a couple times. So I think they feel pretty comfortable. It's a deeper class at safety. So I expect at least one safety, maybe two. And if it's one safety, I could also see them targeting other positions. Like maybe there's an off the ball linebacker they like. Maybe there's a corner, not an expensive corner, but like a depth guy to come in and compete with Stokes and Valentine. Maybe even an offensive lineman who gives them some kind of, a competition at right guard, or some, ability to swing back and forth between guard and tackle as a depth piece. But I think they're going to be a little more active than I originally thought in free agency.
Yeah, and that's where I would say I definitely would expect them to be active the most at safety, right? Like, and it's a combination of draft capital and what the market's like. But yeah, you need that upgrade now, and the safety class in the draft is okay, and maybe those guys can contribute on special teams, work their way in the first season. But is any one of those guys a day one starter? I don't know. I don't hear a lot of people shouting that, and I haven't gotten to dive into too much of the tape, but I don't know if any of those guys is a day one starter, especially maybe in a new defense. There's an advantage there. Everybody's learning, but no, I would look for that. And then, the depth at linebacker, like you're saying, off-ball linebacker, it would be awfully ironic if Patrick came in, but that would be one that I think would be interesting. But yeah, those are the positions I would expect him to address. And like you're saying, maybe an offensive tackle, offensive line, just for depth purposes. But the thing is, this draft is deep at DB, or it's specifically corner. So I wouldn't expect them to dip into the corner free agent market because they just don't need to. They've already got veteran leadership there on multiple levels. But the other thing is the offensive line group in this draft is deep. It's not just tackle. Like there's some good players there on the interior line. So I think they're looking at this again as a draft where you can come out with 2 to 3 offensive linemen that can compete and push the guys that are ahead of them, and then also be future starters. So that's where I would say where the draft is strong, I'd probably expect them to lean away from free agency. But where they need those instant impact players happens to be where free agency is stronger than the draft. So, that's one way to look at it. That's kind of how I've looked at it. We're all guessing here how Goot's looking at it, but yeah. So I mean, let's have a little fun with it though. Who's your, aside from getting Winfield, who we've both acknowledged is like the dream addition here, who would be your strictly free agent addition if you had to make one?
So I've got a few, and I'll most of them are safeties because that's what they need and that's what's deep. But
try to hop to a different position or something.
Let me give you. I'll give you Xavier.
Go with one safety. Yeah,
at safety. So Xavier McKinney or Julian Blackman. You mentioned off-ball linebacker. There's a dude for Carolina, Frankie Louvu.
That's what I'm looking at right now. Play.
Yeah, he can hit like a freight train. I don't know how good he would be in coverage, but he can hit. He can tackle. Definitely a different player than what we have in Quay Walker, but I think he can complement Quay Walker. He's a good one. I think there's some other like depth pieces, like maybe not necessarily starters, but guys that you could find a role for. So AJ Epinesa is a pass rusher from the Bills. He's from Iowa, so Green Bay connection right there. He's a 2nd-round pick. He's always shown some kind of flashes with the Bills. Hasn't put up super big numbers. I don't think he would cost a ton for them to get. But if they were kind of concerned about their depth there with Kingsley and Abari probably going to miss some time coming off the ACL, just with Preston getting up there in age, or like maybe Halfley just wants more guys on the edge to rush the passer. I think Epinesa could give you, some ability. He's not going to come in and get you, 15 sacks, but he could come in there and be a complimentary pass rusher for them. So I kind of like him. And then there's 2 corners. I know you, and I agree with you. I think you draft corners more than you go out there and sign corners. But one is Jeff Okudah, who was the 3rd overall pick from the Lions, had some injuries there. Then Matt Patricia screwed him up. Went to the Falcons last year. He's a free agent again. He played for Halfley at Ohio State, and he loved Halfley. There's some old, when I was researching Halfley, there's clips of Okudah at the combine, the combine when he was getting drafted, before he got drafted, talking about Halfley and how much Halfley helped his game. He even went to Boston College to work out because Halfley had gotten a head coaching job there. He went to Boston College to work out, have Halfley train him before the draft.
This is an interesting one, man. He's only 25 years old.
Yeah, and he was number 3 pick for a reason.
Yeah.
Like he could play. He was a really good athlete. But he's had an injury history. He's disappointed. I don't think he would cost much, and he could probably get him for a 1-year deal. He's going to want to try to prove himself. Plus the ties to Halfley, maybe they feel like, hey, we can turn this kid around and make him something.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, man. That's an interesting one to point out. I didn't realize he was floating around out there.
Yeah. So he was with the Falcons last season after the Lions. I think the Lions traded him there for like nothing, like maybe a late round pick or something.
Ouch.
But he had injuries there, and Matt Patricia, he screwed him up. I mean, he didn't know how to use him, and Matt Patricia's, not a good head coach or defensive coordinator. The other name that I'll throw out there, and this is credit to Matt Schneidman, who covers the Packers for The Athletic. He threw like a random tweet out, I think over the weekend, just saying, I think it was look for the Packers or expect the Packers to target C.J. Henderson in free agency. He's a corner from the Panthers. And it was very random. It wasn't like, hey, I've heard but Schneidman was in Indianapolis. Maybe he heard something at the combine. Maybe he saw them meeting with his agent. I don't know, but it was kind of like a random tweet. And it's not like CJ Henderson's at the top of the list where you could be like, yeah, look for the Packers to target Xavier McKinney or, Jordan Fuller, one of these top safeties. So that kind of caught my eye. Like, of all people, he put, like, there must be something there that he knows about. So Henderson's kind of similar to Okudah. He was a high draft pick. He was 9th overall by Jacksonville. And basically what happened to him is he was drafted by one GM. Second year in the league, they brought in Urban Meyer. Wasn't drafted by Urban Meyer or Trent Baalke, who was Meyer's or is still the GM there, but was brought in with Meyer. So like they didn't draft him. I guess they didn't like him. They traded him to Carolina. So he's been with Carolina for a couple of years now. And again, he's had some injuries. Hasn't stood out necessarily there, but again, he was a good athlete. He was a good college player. He was a 9th overall pick for a reason.
Yeah.
Again, maybe like Okudah, he could be a guy they target as like a cheap deal that they think they can fix him. Who knows?
Another guy. He's 25 years old.
He's
25's young. You know,
he's really young for a free agent. And I don't know why Schneidman would put that out there. I mean, that's a pretty random player to just throw out there to say the Packers are going to target him.
That is pretty random.
So there must be something that he knows that is causing him to tweet that. But that caught my attention over the weekend as another name.
Interesting. Okay. Are you buying into any of the idea that we should add a running back via free agency?
No, I don't. Okay. I don't. There's a ton of them,
There's a ton of them.
I don't like any of them, to be honest. Andy Herman he put a video out today previewing the running backs, and the one he mentioned is like under the radar, and this was a good one, but I still don't see the Packers doing. But Antonio Gibson from Washington, who was kind of, if you go back to college, he went to Memphis. He was kind of like used as a running back, but they used him as a slot receiver too. He was kind of like a tweener.
Yeah.
Washington hasn't really taken advantage of all of his receiving skills, and they didn't have a quarterback. They were a mess. So maybe there's more there. He does have skill. He does have ability. So like I could see him being like a nice compliment to Aaron Jones. He's probably not going to be expensive. I don't know. I don't see the Packers spending any kind of free agent money on a running back.
Doesn't make sense to me.
No, like and even the guys that are out, Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry, they're going to be too much money. Even though
they're already trying to renegotiate with Aaron Jones to try to get his number down.
Right, they're trying to get his. Like I like Tony Pollard. He's a nice back. He'd be a nice, but he's going to be too much money for a number 2 running back. Like, yeah. It just, to me, it doesn't make sense to spend on a running. Just draft one.
Yeah,
or 2.
No, I totally agree. And I mean, really, that's where I try to look at the offensive side of the ball. Is there anywhere you would add a body? And I just don't think so, especially not before the draft. Like there's just too much in this draft class on the offensive line, at cornerback, even on the defensive line, pass rusher. That you don't need to go off spending money before you know if you can get those pieces or not.
Right, and
that's where I'd be at.
Yeah, and I agree with you offensively. Like I could see offensive line, but I almost would wait. Like you're saying, like just take them in the draft. And it's one of those positions where maybe if you don't get somebody in the draft, or you get a day 3 guy who you're not even sure about, then maybe you go back to free agency and see who's available in May or June and pick somebody up at that point. But to do it right now, I don't know. I don't know if it makes sense for them to do that, especially not receiver or tight end or quarterback. And we talk about running back. So I think if they're going to go free agency, it's defense and it's safety. And I know you don't want me naming safeties, but there's a bunch of them.
All right, give me a couple more. Who do you think actually makes sense?
So I think McKinney's probably going to be out of their price range, but he makes a lot of sense, and he would be my number 1 guy. Jordan Fuller from the Rams. He's a solid player. He's almost kind of like Amos was. Like he's not going to ever be an all-pro or a pro baller, but he's just a solid dude. And he played for Halfley at Ohio State for whatever that's worth.
It's worth something.
Yeah, and there's a kid from the Chargers, Gilman, Aloha Gilman, or Aloha. Played for Derek Ainsley, who's now our passing game coordinator on defense. again, he's a solid corner. He's not going to set the world on, or solid safety. He's not going to, make a Pro Bowl or an All Pro, but he would be an upgrade over what we've had. And I think he'd be pretty solid. I like Julian Blackman from the Colts. And then if we get into like some other guys like Cameron Curls out there from Washington, Geno Stone from Baltimore, Jordan Whitehead from the Jets, like it's pretty deep with safeties. And I think they're going to have a lot of options as far as who they want, who they're targeting. And, if a couple guys do get signed before free agency starts, I don't think it's going to like kill the market for safeties. I think there's still going to be some guys out there.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And again, he said he's willing to make a trade. So I imagine there's a few guys out there that maybe aren't even on the market that he's got his eye on. And for one reason or another, we don't know what those relationships are. We do know that there's Packer front office networks all around the league. So that could probably be a factor. I'm sure that plays into it somewhere. But it'll be interesting to see how they navigate it. I think that we're going to learn a lot over these next few weeks with the Green Bay visits for these draft prospects. That's why we're going to start diving into them. Next week we're getting into running backs and the off-ball linebackers. So we're really going to look through there and see who makes the most sense for the Packers to target. We already saw the guys that they met with at the Combine. So Jonathan Brooks at UT, Braylon Allen out of UW, Austin Estime out of Notre Dame, and then I believe they met with Trey Taylor from Air Force at the Shrine Bowl. They may have had other meetings than those, but those are the ones I could find.
Yeah, and so going back to, we're talking about running backs in the draft. So
yeah,
Goody had mentioned that he would like to have a bigger back, to complement Aaron Jones, which I found kind of interesting. I mean, I know they had A.J. Dillon, but he specifically mentioned a bigger back. So that made me go back and like, okay, well, some of these guys that I thought were fits at running back in the draft, maybe they aren't. But what did you like? Do you take anything from that? Is he just throwing something out there? Do you really think he wants a bigger back? And then who are the bigger backs? I know Braylon Allen, but besides Braylon Allen, who are the bigger backs in this draft that you like?
Well, there's the kid from Notre Dame. He's not a big he's not 250, 245, 250 like Braylon Allen, AJ Dillon, but he's 6'1", 220. He carries it. A little bit slow on his 40 time. I think he had a 4.6, 4.7, something like that. I don't know if he fits that mold, but the kid from South Dakota State is one to keep an eye on because he, I believe, is also about 6'1", 220, 225. Isaiah Davis. Let's jump over and see how he looked at the Combine because I know he was there. On a running backs, he's one to keep an eye on. They don't shy away from the small school guys. He had a very good career at South Dakota State, ran very well. I took a few notes on him already, and this is, I guess, a little bit of a preview of what we're going to be talking about next week, if I can find those notes. But anyway, we've got him here. As far as how he measured up, so he's not huge. 6 foot 218 is what he came into the Combine. So I think he was listed at 225 for South Dakota State. So a little bit lighter than I thought, but he runs like a big back. Like he runs behind his pads. He runs well. He runs with good balance and good vision. He doesn't shy away from contact. But he's one of those guys that I think when I was watching him on tape, he's a team guy, right? He's looking for work. He's not shying away from blocking for other guys. His pass pro looked pretty good. He's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but he's a guy that I think could fit that mold for him. And there's a few. I mean, the running back group, like I said, is kind of fun to look at. And Isaac Garendo is in there too. He's a pretty big kid. Let's see if we can find his measurables.
I think he was like 220.
He's big,
right? But he's like you probably know better as a Wisconsin, but he would always seem like he was just the speed home run hitting back, like not the big power back, that's going to run through people. He was, get the ball and hope he can get space and he's going to take off and go because nobody's going to catch him.
Right. Well, and he really didn't blossom until he got to Louisville. So I don't know if it was a style thing or you just never know what it is. There's a lot of factors that go on in college football. But, he weighed in at 6 foot 221. So he's a thick dude. And his athleticism score is crazy. Running 4.33 in the 40 at 220, that might be more impressive than Xavier Worthy running 4.21 at 165.
Yeah.
Like 4.33 at 220 is wild. That's power right there, man. And he had a 41.5 vertical, 10.9, almost 11-foot broad jump. Yeah, that's power. So Isaac Garindo is one that is I think I'm saying that right. He's one to keep an eye on. I think he will get drafted earlier than most people think, and that's why I don't know if he makes it to the Packers. That's where you got to keep an eye on these guys. Like, you look at him in a vacuum, like, oh yeah, that'd be cool. He's a piece that you could plug in, and he's a great athlete. Sounds great, right? But at the end of the day, there's 32 teams that are all looking at the same guys. If you can imagine, like, we've seen it happen. These guys get reached for based on their athleticism, and it happens every draft. Guys bust because of it. So this is one, not to say that Garindo would be a bust, but I do think that he will get drafted higher than what the Packers maybe value him at. But yeah, if you can put 6 foot 220 running a 4.33 in the backfield, man, that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, he seemed like he would be a great day 3 pick for them. And he's got kick return experience too. So if Keyshawn Nixon's not back, he could do that as well. I know he's got the injury history again, and he's a little older. So those are two things. Like, usually the Packers don't draft him, but if he does fall into the third day and he's there, like, they probably, maybe they bend their rules a little bit for a day 3 pick at running back for a guy who had that kind of a workout, those kind of measurements and athletic score. Maybe they can look beyond, some of the injuries he's had and his, being a little bit older than most draft picks.
Yeah, they haven't been totally rigid with those things, right? They've definitely bent away from those rules here and there. Unfortunately, they've been wrong most of the time.
More so on day 3, they kind of, there's a little bit, like Carl Brooks was a day 3 pick last year, and his RAS score was not very good, and he looks like a damn good find for a day 3 pick. But it's more so they get in trouble on the first 2 days when they get away from, those athletic guys. So
yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, I think Garendo's he certainly popped, and I think he made himself a little more money with his combine workout.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we're going to get into running backs next week. There's definitely a few guys to watch for. Another one that's kind of fun, and I'm looking forward to watching a little bit more of him, is a kid out of Troy, Vidal. He's 5'8", 218. That's a thick 5'8".
Yeah.
That is a thick 5'8". 218, man. Like, whoo, boy. That's Maurice Jones-Drew territory. So he's one that you can keep an eye on. But yeah, the list is deep. The running back position, I think, is being a little bit devalued right now. But that's you can't take away the talent that's there. Like, there's some talent there. So I guess overlook at your own risk. I don't think GMs will do that. I think GMs are going to find a way to start getting more creative in finding a place for these guys, because they're talented, man. It's unfortunate that their value has gone down, and it's largely because you can find a guy like Isaiah Pacheco in the 7th round, and he can start for a Super Bowl winning team. But that doesn't take away from the potential value that they have. So the running back position for me is a fun one to look at, and looking forward to throwing a few more names out there next week. But the inside linebackers as well, or off-ball linebackers, we'll say, I think is also a little bit of a fun group to look at, because it's a sneaky group. There's no big star power. You got Cooper out of A&M, but there's some definite guys worth looking at there. Are you going to be looking into those guys, Tim? Are you taking the linebackers?
Sure, I'll take the linebackers. You want those running backs? You can go that route. I'll do linebackers.
I already got a head start on the running backs.
You sound like it.
Yeah. But yeah, so Tim will bring in the knowledge about the inside linebackers next week. We'll break them down and take a look at who we think might start being or looking more like a Packer. But yeah, as you know, we're starting to get into the meat of the offseason here. We've got free agency around the corner. A few guys have already been scooped up out of that, right? Mike Evans is no longer out there. But, we talked a little bit about those free agents. Is there anybody any Packers that you still think might come back?
I mean, there's some special teams guys. Like, I think Eric Wilson will probably be back. But, he's a veteran, minimum salary signing. So that's nothing noteworthy. And they don't really have any bigger names, but for the more well-known, for the more, established players, I think there's still a chance. Keyshawn Nixon, I think Savage and AJ Dillon are out the door. I think Yash is out the door.
About Runyon, man, I'm kind of rooting for him. He's over.
Yeah,
he really wants to be a Packer.
He does, and that's cool to see. I just think the fact that they had him, sharing snaps with Sean Ryan, that kind of tells you where it's at. Like,
yeah,
I don't think he's going to break the bank in free agency, but he could get like a low-level starter salary.
Yeah, he could find
someone else.
Gig.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's two starting guards on 32 teams, so he's definitely should be a starting guard. And if the Packers are going to pay him starting money, and they weren't even, they were starting him, but he was playing half the snaps, like, kind of tells you what they think of him. Like, he's not a good enough starter for them, that they were already replacing him for half the game. So I don't think he's back. Like I said, I think there's a chance Keyshawn Nixon, I think Savage, Dillon, Runyon are probably all gone. Yash is gone. So yeah, I mean, maybe Jonathan Owens, but that would be like a down the line re-signing. But the only one that I'm curious about is Nixon. I think most of the other named ones are probably gone.
Well, yeah, and I think I was going to say Jonathan Owens. I think Owens and Nixon probably have the best chances of coming back for their special teams value.
Yeah.
And like I was saying before, you want veteran leadership there. Well, you're going to need veteran leadership in the special teams area as well. So I do think that they have the best chance of coming back, depending on probably what they get out of the draft. But yeah, I mean, as we kind of look at this, there was something, I guess I kind of glossed over it. We get distracted by the skill positions, but I did want to call out a performance from the offensive line at the Combine. And I'm calling this out for a very specific reason, because he's a Wisconsin guy. Just absolutely destroyed the Combine. Where is it? He's not popping up on their thing here. But anyway, Bortolini, man.
Yeah.
Whew.
Where did that come from?
Yeah, I mean,
jeez.
I was aware that, he's in the draft and I
Yeah.
kind of had him out there. I was looking forward to maybe talking about a potential Badger. But, yeah, we were kind of looking at him like probably a day 3 guy. And what an athlete. My goodness.
I mean, yeah, and he was a guard and a center at Wisconsin.
Yeah.
But like, I knew of him, but I didn't watch him closely or anything like that. Like, did he actually show that kind of ability? Like, their offensive line hasn't been that good the last couple of years. Like,
well, I think one thing to keep in mind is the transition that happened there, right? So Luke Fickell comes in, and there was a little bit of turbulence before that. And then you got the transition of some guys leaving, some guys staying, new system. So I think that there's players that are coming out of Wisconsin, and you see it with Isaac Guerrero, that are great or potentially great players, but good players, and just didn't get a chance to flourish at Wisconsin because of some of the extracurricular stuff going on. So something to keep an eye on. I think, Allen probably suffered from that a little bit too, although he had a great career.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Bortolini, man, he's one to keep an eye on. He's played all the offensive line positions, and we know that that's Goot's love language when it comes to offensive linemen. And with the athleticism, that I don't know who else that surprised. I guess to some extent you don't want to be surprised at the Combine because you want to see speed and athleticism come out on tape. But I got to believe the confirmation of it at the very least was good for him. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he definitely stood. I mean, he blew the combine away.
Yeah.
He might have got himself into the third round. Who knows? But he went from maybe being a late day 3 guy to, definitely a day 3 guy. Maybe even he sneaks in, like I said, to day 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
So good for him. It was cool to see. And he's got versatility and he's a really good athlete. So keep him in mind for the Packers.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. He's got Packers written all over him. So hopefully we'll see. We'll see if he gets one of those Green Bay invites. But are there any other standouts on the combine that you had? I don't want to get too far away from this here because we got really caught up in the skill positions.
Yeah, I mean, and just real quick, I mean, we don't have to go into much depth, but a couple cornerbacks that I definitely want to go back and look at. Kyrie Jackson of Oregon, and then another Jeff Hafley guy, Elijah Jones of Boston College, and Darian Jones, a cornerback from Florida State. Didn't know much about those guys. We'll definitely go back and look at them. Bigger corners, and they tested very well. So worth keeping in mind. But yeah, I think we touched on a lot of the other guys. There were some, guys, first round guys who tested very well that we kind of expected, like Dallas Turner, Chop Robinson. Guys like that did very well testing. And another shout out, Quentin Mitchell. We've talked about him before, the cornerback from Toledo.
Gosh, yeah, man.
Yeah, I mean,
what a performance! That dude's a beast.
Yeah, I don't want to be. He's not going to be there when they pick guy, but
I don't think he's going to be there.
He's probably not going to be there. Yeah, and the testing definitely took him out of the Packers range because I would love to have him be there at 25. But shout out to him from Toledo, and he went in there and just blew up the combine after he had a great Senior Bowl too. So yeah, he's a stud, and it's a really good class of corners.
It really is. That's why it'll be interesting to see what Goot does down there at 25 and 41, because you're going to see there is talent being pushed up the board, right? So, when you've got a guy like Quentin Mitchell and Nate Wiggins, all of a sudden DeJean starts falling a little bit. And you still got those kids out of Bama, and you still got Rakestraw.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of first-round talent right there, and same thing I think you're going to see with the offensive line. There's some first-round talent there, man, and then those positions start pushing things down. There's some real heavy talent at receiver, and we know there's going to be a run at quarterback, and so there's only 24 positions ahead of the Packers, and there's a lot of great players that you can look at and go, probably not going to be there. But that pushes some other great players right back down. So it'll be interesting to see if maybe a Mitchell and a Wiggins going earlier pushes DeJean back to the Packers, because I know that's everybody's favorite. Although he didn't meet with the Packers at the Combine. Right. I think that's one of those that they didn't need to meet with him. Not concerned about him not performing because he's recovering from an injury. Sounds like he's going to be ready for his pro day. We can put together our own RAS score when we get that pro day result, and we'll talk about it. But yeah, that's where it's fascinating to me how all of this is unfolding. What really the Combine can illustrate for us the most is the depth of talent, right? When you see just a number of 4-3 guys at the cornerback position, then a big number of 4-4 guys, and you go like they're well-rounded athletes. Whereas in the past, and I guess I'm becoming old now, but it used to be like 4-6s and 4-5s, and then like a 4-4 and a 4-3. Man, those are the fast guys right there. And now they're all fast, and you go back to the tape, they're all pretty good. You have to really start to split hairs to figure out who's better in some of these cases, which is why I'm not trying to do any of that. But what will be interesting is to figure out who we think, is still on the Packers' radar. But, yeah, it's starting to shape up. And you're getting some confirmation what you thought, right? You thought the receivers are deep. They're deep. You thought the O-line was deep. I think the O-line is deeper than people think.
Yes.
That's going to be a fun one to continue talking about. D-line, too. D-line's pretty deep. When you're talking about Jenkins, the kid out of Michigan, going in the third round or something, he's going to be a pretty good player.
He ain't lasting until the third round now. I like him a lot. I like him a lot, and I don't know if the Packers take another D lineman early after they took Wyatt and obviously Brooks and Wooden last year, like they have got, but I like him a lot. And the other kid out of Florida State, Fisk, Braden Fisk, I mean, his numbers were
he
incredible.
earned a few spots.
Yeah. But I'm right with you with Jenkins was really impressive. So, and there's some edge rushers that did really well too. Jarrett Verse, who I really like in the first round. The kid Nealand out of Western Michigan tested very well. So, yeah, there's some options there, and I think there's going to be a pretty good pool of players for the Packers to look at. And like you said about the first round, guys are going to get pushed down, and we can, as we get closer, like we can start figuring out, like, all right, there's going to be, at this point, I think there's definitely going to be 4 quarterbacks picked before 25, and then
safe,
there's definitely going to be 3, probably 4 or 5 receivers before then, but definitely 3. And like
I would say definitely 4.
Definitely. Okay. So we can start figuring out like what groups are going to get pushed down. And I think at some point there's going to be a run on cornerbacks, but that might be part of the run, might be part where the Packers are picking. That run might get pushed a little later. But there's a lot of cornerbacks to choose from. So,
well, and there's a benefit of falling in the middle of a
from.
Run, right? If there's somebody sitting back there that would like to be part of that run, well, the price for that pick,
Yeah.
That's what I mean. This is going to be an interesting draft, and we've talked about this before, where Goot picks from the deep positions. You've got plenty of deep positions right now that are complementing what is available in free agency, right? Where free agency is plentiful, the draft is not. Where you really don't need to go to free agency anyway, the draft is deep. So it's going to be fun to watch, but I do think that there's going to be some disappointed Packer fans in the first and second round going, we don't need a receiver. We don't need this guy. It's like, if you've learned anything, it's that Goot does not draft for need, man. That guy does not care. In fact, I think he almost leans into it like, oh, we don't need that guy. Let's get that one. We're going to go in. We're going to lean into this. So just be prepared to be disappointed and stuff. Don't try to root for certain picks, because then you end up looking like these guys from the Bills that are devastated that the Bills didn't draft Josh Rosen instead of Josh Allen.
Just know that they're not, whoever your draft crushes, they're not taking them.
They're not taking them. They don't take draft crushes.
Don't fall in love with anybody, and just trust in Goot and enjoy whoever it is that they pick.
Or just join us and you'll end up falling in love with all of them, and it'll be great. We're going to make them all sound like top 10 picks.
Right.
Cool, man. No, I mean, I don't know that I have anything else to add from the Combine. It was all around. It was fun to watch. It's always cool to see records fall. Worthy certainly elevated his draft stock. And as I was saying, he'll probably have a successful NFL career, but I do think he'll get drafted higher now than he would have before, and maybe higher than some guys that will end up having better careers than him. I brought this one comparison earlier on Twitter to say, in the 2020 draft, Jalen Reagor was drafted 1 spot ahead of Justin Jefferson. Right, so just keep that in mind.
Happens every year, all the time.
Every year, it happens all the time. So that's what makes it fun, though, is there really are franchise-changing players that are going to be available where the Packers are picking. You don't need to be like the Bears and have a perennial top 5 pick to think that you're going to be good someday. We can root for some of these guys that are going to be there. So that's what we're going to continue doing. We're going to, over the next few weeks now, leading up to the draft, so the next few weeks, about 6 weeks or so to the draft, 7 weeks. We're going to be going down, breaking down positions. Like I said, next week is running back and inside linebacker. Then we're diving into receivers and corners for 2 weeks because there's too many of them. Then we're going to come back with safeties and tight ends. Not a whole lot to talk about with the tight ends, but we're going to find a few to focus in on, maybe some smaller school guys that you haven't heard of before. And then we're going to graze over, kind of gloss over the QBs there right before we get close to the draft, because it doesn't freaking matter. We don't need to talk about QBs. If they take a QB, great. Is he going to beat out Jordan Love? It doesn't matter. He's not beating out Jordan Love. So whoever he takes at QB, that's fantastic. I would actually, I think a lot of folks have chimed in to say they'd love to see Milton, right? That'd be fun. Get that launch, that cannon of an arm, and just have him, Like, he's more just like practice entertainment at that point.
Yeah. I mean, he's got a can and he'd throw it through the stadium, but
Yeah.
I don't think he can hit a receiver.
Well, we'll see. But the other thing is, can they beat Clifford? Man, Clifford, he looks pretty good.
Yeah.
We might not be even talking about QB2 here if Goot drafts one. But anyway, we'll touch on QBs there in April. I think that's April 8th. We're going to go after that. And then we'll do one mock draft right beforehand where we go through and we'll play with that. But we're not going to mess around with mock drafts before that. It's just you just keep rolling dice and see what happens. That's about as good as a mock draft is. But hopefully by the end of this thing, when we get to the draft, what you all will have is a good idea of some players that the Packers really might take, right? And when we're in rounds 4, 5, 6, 7, there's still names on the board that we've talked about that would be great players for the Packers to look at. And you're not just all of a sudden bored after round 1 because now the names that you've heard of are gone. So that's what we're aiming to do. We don't claim to have a crystal ball, though. There's plenty of folks out there doing that, and we're not going to do that. We're going to let them do that. But other than that, we are grateful that you all listened and hung out with us tonight. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for just hanging out with us this week on the Packers Weekly Podcast, part of the PackersTalk.com network. If y'all would, please spike that like button for us if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to the Packers Talk YouTube channel. Check us out on all the socials. We love getting into it and go back and forth, doing a little Packers banter 7 days a week, man. And we will see y'all next week. Go, Pack, go.